why is this the way it is? But the question is why are there so many churches? Right? Anyone ever asked that? Right? Especially as you maybe, if you're coming into faith or you're trying to explore faith and you're like, why is it I cross like 20 churches before I get to the church where I'm going? Like, what's wrong with this church right here? Like, maybe there's nothing. Maybe it would have been. And, we'll get into that in a second. But, why are there so many ideas? Why are there so much stuff going on? And we did talk a little bit on our first day. We had this idea where, there was the church. And it was kind of together, which is, if you read the book of Acts, that there is no, like, honeymoon period for the church. Very soon after the starting of the church, Jesus crucified, resurrected, he meets with his close people and a number of others, and he gives them this commission to go into the world and preach the gospel and baptize and do all this great stuff. And they're like, yes, this is exciting. The first thing they do is they start fighting, they start arguing, they start forgetting about the least of these and those in their community that need help, and they have to butt heads all the time. Most of the books of Acts is like just this conflict, like going through. We like the highlights of like, well, this guy was healed and there was this many people are saved, but most of the underlying story is them working out. What does this mean to be the church? So it's the idea that it was ever just like this kumbaya moment where they all came together it's a little bit of a fairy tale. But we'll see eventually they did kind of keep it somewhat together for a while, and then eventually there's all these splits that happen, and there's two big ones, and then you get into the Protestantism, which where we kind of find ourselves, and there are like 30,000 plus different groups. Now that gets a little weird because if one person has like their family together and they meet in their house and they're a new church, like technically they are, if the research is good enough and they find them, they're a new denominational sect. It's like, well, they're probably not. But we're gonna kind of clump it into some different groups. And the heart of this is not to say we have it together. You have luckily found. Yeah, some of you. I love it. Some of and then sometimes when we get into church and we talk about other churches, it's because we are going to explain how we are superior and we have figured it out right. And we have it all together. And those church down the road, right? This is not that at all, right? We will get into some weeds and some things. And my goal, though, is that we can go through this. We can honor those that are different than us, those that maybe look at a few things different. We can maybe find some lines that are like, these are non-negotiables. Maybe some things you step over a line and it's not really a church anymore. It's just kind of a gathering of something. We talk about that a little bit, but the goal is that when we leave here, right, get the goal right out first, is that we are just like, wow, isn't it so amazing that God has given us this opportunity to explore faith, explore life with Him, and in some ways it expresses itself differently, right? We do things a certain way here, and there's folks in other parts of the world and country who do things a little different, and it's beautiful. We really should see it as beautiful, not as like, wow, yeah, rah, 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 right? No, we want to honor and love the church. If you have a Bible, or you got one on your phone, why don't you open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And my little bookmark today is this little pack of cards. They are little business cards, and I meant to do these during the announcements, but I totally forgot. We have these little business cards. There's a basket of them in the foyer when you head on your way out. There's like, 5 or 6 in these little cards. And on the front it says you're invited to join us at the Lake Region Vineyard. And on the back it just has a little bit of, this is what we do, this is how it is, kind of navigate that space, the information, kind of look on the website and go into some other things. Maybe you've had conversations with people about faith or about church, and at the end of that conversation, you go, hey, here's a card just to remind you. Like, here's the address. We meet at 10. And if you ever have any questions, give me a call. Check that out. Or most people that go to a church or attend it, they snoop it out first. They go on Facebook. They go on the website. They do all that kind of reconnaissance stuff. So it allows them to remind them to be like, I got to check those people out. Make sure they're not too weird. Because if they know you, they're probably like, those people are weird. So I gotta make sure. No. But just a great way to invite and to get that in there. There is no time on there. There's no like actual information. And that's kind of on purpose, that you don't just like kind of like leave these places. Like, there's a place for leaving places. Like the janitor doesn't need to be picking these up at your local, wherever you work, because you're leaving them all over the place. Your waitress if you have a conversation with her about faith, about church, leave her with one, but you don't need to keep spamming her with all your stuff, right? These are for, hey, have you talked to someone about faith in church? And go, here's a reminder. Hey, I'd love to see you there. I'll save a space for you. Come and hang out with me and see what happens. And maybe that will lead to another story. These are to kind of strengthen some things that are in there. But anyway, getting off track. So if we're on 1 Corinthians chapter 8, now this chapter, we're going to read through kind of a chunk of scripture here, is it can be a little confusing, it can be a little hard to wrestle with, but it's just an interesting dynamic that's happening in the text, right? Because sometimes we get into our idea that faith is all about just knowing all the right answers for some kind of future pop quiz that's coming. Right? There's a pop quiz that's coming, and if I can know all the answers about how everything works out, and God has given me that information, I'm going to move into that space. Well, we're going to see that maybe it's sometimes a little sticky. It's sometimes a little sticky when it comes to those things. Now, in chapter 8, he says this. He's writing this book to the church in Corinth. The church in Corinth, when we talk about, I just wish we were like the early church. The church in Corinth is a mess. They are doing weird stuff. Read the book, all right? There's kids in the room. We can't talk about half the stuff that was going on in that church and what they thought a healthy expression of the Christian faith was, right? So Paul has to write him 2 letters. There's actually probably more, but we got these 2 here to try to set them straight. And in here, they have this conversation here. They said, now, about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think that they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. It's a little tongue twister. Dr. Seuss might have been influenced on this one, right? But he's saying, look, love is the winner here. Pride and knowing the right answers puffs up. And now he brings up in the beginning this idea of meat sacrificed to idols. Now that's not something that is super common to us today. And parts of the world, maybe this is still practiced. But in this time period, there would be animals that would be sacrificed ceremonially and then sold in these like different shops and stuff, and you could actually partake in the worship of that sacrifice by going and buying that food, which is kind of a little bit of a racket if you think about it. Be like, hey, my meat's like, not only is it good, but like you can like worship at the same time. It's a little economic enterprise going on in the midst of this worship, right? And so people would go and they get the meat and they bring it home and they kind of partake in this sacrifice. And so the early church in this time, they were having folks who were a part of that practice, right? And they've come over into the church and they're saying, I don't want to be a part of that practice anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to go and be a part of that. And the church in this time, they'd get together and eat meals a lot. There's a reason why we do hot dogs a lot. Hopefully those hot dogs haven't been sacrificed to something, but we'll see in a second. Maybe that's not a big deal. And they get together and eat. And so they get together and eat, and there would be meat at the table, and they'd be like, well, where'd you get the meat? They're like, I don't know, some guy down there, like, that guy? That's the, like, idol meat. And they're like, don't worry about it, man. It's like, don't worry. And they'd start to have this panic back and forth, right? So that's kind of what's going on under the covers here, and he's trying to give them some wisdom on how to handle the situation. Whoever loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if they are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods, lowercase g, with air quotes, and many lords, these would be like leaders and things like that. Yet for us, there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came, and from whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through whom we live. So here's the doctrinal, theological position that Paul gives on meat sacrificed to idols. There are no idols. Don't worry about it. Right? That's pretty much, he's like, we know that now there's some gods in lowercase l's. There's a spiritual world that's going on, but don't give yourself too much energy trying to figure out what's going on there. Just eat the meat, make sure you cook it, put a little rub on it first, smoke it. It's going to be good, right? That's his perspective on this. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still accustomed to idols, and they eat sacrificed food. They think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us nearer to God we are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Right? He's saying, but if your conscience, is an interesting dynamic that gets pulled up in the text. If your conscience is being violated, right? Even though what you're doing maybe is not what you think it is, you're actually walking towards sin. You're walking towards not doing this well. Now, this is not a case to be like, just do whatever your conscience wants. And your conscience, okay, you'll be fine. No. These are people saying like, oh man, I feel, as I eat this, I just feel like I'm being pulled back into this. And that defiling of the conscience is really important. It's really important in this, and he's bringing this up here, and he's saying, don't bring them in that space. He says, be careful, however, that this exercise of your right does not become a stumbling block for the weak. For it is some with weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in idol's temple. Won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by the knowledge. When you sin against them in this way, and with their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again. Sorry, man, that's a tough one. So that I will not cause them to fall. Right? Now, it's a complicated thing because it's not something we necessarily deal with today in our culture, but it is interesting that he's bringing up this idea of like, you know what? Sometimes there's moments when doing something a certain way that you might feel it's fine, you go, man, there's nothing really here, there's nothing really spiritual about this. Somebody else sees it with deep spiritual significance. Deep spiritual significance. And sometimes that significance is just out there and it's weird. And then sometimes it is something that's in their conscience they haven't quite wrestled with. And we need to be with compassion and mercy, walk with them in that space. Right? And as we look at other churches and other communities of faith, somewhere along in their history they discovered something beautiful to them, right? And we might look at it and go, that's really not that cool. Right? And they're like, oh, but if I don't do it this way, I just feel like I might. And that's actually a not right theological position. But I feel like the scriptures would lead us to unity is actually more important than getting it all right. Right? It is more important than getting it all right. Now, with that said, hopefully that brings up for some of you a little like, well, then what are we doing? What does this mean? There are some lines. There are some lines that we draw in the sand. Right? One of the things that we talk about a lot here is Jesus. We're following after the way of Jesus. And we see Jesus as the model to model our lives after. He's worthy of worship. He is God in the flesh. His life, death, and resurrection changes the world. Gives us access to forgiveness of our brokenness and healing for our brokenness and restoration for all things. Right? And in a lot of church stuff, and I read books, and I talk with a lot of different people about kind of doing things, and I'll hear people go like, I just really love Jesus, and I just want to follow after Jesus, but like the church and that Bible stuff, I'm just not really interested in that. And there's something kind of romantic about that, like it's just me and Jesus. And I'm like, my usual question is, so how do you know about Jesus? Well, from the church. Oh, okay, so you want to get rid of that gave you your information about Jesus. And where did they get the information? From the Bible. Right? So you want to get rid of the tools and the pieces that actually formed what you know about Jesus. And you want to get rid of those things. And eventually, if you get rid of those things enough, you'll have a Jesus of your own liking. Right? You'll take the pieces you like and add a few other ones, and you'll have this new Jesus who you love so much, which is really yourself in the mirror, and you're saying how great I am. Right? I am all for it. Let's just follow Jesus. Right? But we know Jesus through the text. We know Jesus from the scriptures. And then we have church history where people have been wrestling with the text, wrestling what it means to follow Jesus. And it's like, I don't want to throw all that out either because there might be some mistakes and repeats that I don't want to do, so I can just learn from them and move forward. You can't disconnect the pieces. And when we create a Jesus in our own image, we get something really weird. Right? And so when we say these churches, they're maybe they have some different ideas, there's different opinions on things. Who is Jesus is always the first thing. Right? Well, we like music like this. Okay, music, whatever. Who is Jesus? Oh, we'd really like to do service in the community. That's great. Who is Jesus to you? And if Jesus is not the Son of God, if Jesus is not worthy of taking our brokenness upon himself and atoning for our sins, covering for our sins, like, why are we doing this? If he's just a good teacher, or just a good prophet, or a spiritual person, man, we should be opening the door to all kinds of other ideas because he's not absolute. He's not perfect in that way. As we work through, in a minute, we're going to kind of clump some different churches together in a kind of how they approach things. But there are a number of churches that have a different Jesus, right? Maybe you've had someone come to your door before, a very clean-cut person, and they have their Bible with them, and they're talking about Jesus, and then you start to hear some things of, how do you get that? Well, we have this other book that helps us discover who Jesus really is. And you go, well, what if the Bible was just enough? And they go, oh, we really love the Bible. The Bible's really good, but we need this other book. But what if your other book tells me something different about what the Bible says? Well, we just, right? We come back to the scriptures. We don't want to get this thing too complicated, right? There's enough here to chew on forever, right? There's enough here. We don't need to add some things. And so when people start to add things to Jesus or change Jesus, things get off kilter. Paul, I think as he's writing this letter and he's writing other letters, he says, look, if someone comes to you with another gospel, another way to look at Jesus, even if they're saying an angel has come to them, right? Really a great way to win an argument. An angel came to me. And that's what he's talking about, right? I found some tablets in the wood that only I can read. Right? Sorry, right? When those things start to pop up, they start to go, okay. And he goes, even if that happens, it's another gospel, you throw it away. Even if they're working miracles, they're doing amazing, you throw that idea. You say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Thank you very much. I am moving on. Now, one of the things that is hard in our culture today is we have lost the ability to just not agree. Mm-hmm. Right? Anybody notice that? Anybody on social media? Yeah, right? We have lost the ability to just be like, I don't agree with that. And then just be like a handshake and be like, good day. And move on. Right? It doesn't have to be this drawn out battle. Now, if somebody wants to have a conversation, they want to have a debate about it, they want to go back, great. If they can be civil and they can be logical about it, that's awesome. We'd love to foster actual communication. Imagine that. Wouldn't that be great? Like actual people talking and giving their ideas and listening to another idea and going back and forth. That would be a beautiful thing. But we have this idea that just because someone may have a different Jesus, that doesn't mean I'm attacking them and I'm against them. I'm just going like, look, as for me and my house, as for me and what I'm doing, this is where I'm at. Now, if you have something very convincing, let me hear it. Like you got like your 30-second elevator pitch. And if it's not super convincing, like I'm just like, sorry, I'm not that bright, and I'm just going to work on what we got here. If we got to add stuff to it, that's great. You want to add stuff, you figure that out on your own. This isn't a competition. This isn't a battle. Unity is very important, even with those who we would maybe even disagree with. So as we kind of open up through some of that stuff, one of the actually that book right there. Thought I had it here. Thanks. This is a great little book by Richard Foster, who's a Quaker. Right? I love to read things from other communities. It's called Streams of Living Water. And what he does is he breaks down the church into a handful of different approaches, if you will, to spirituality. Right? Instead of going like, because there's 3,000 Protestant churches and then a handful of Orthodox, and the Catholics will say, oh, we're unified, but they have all these groups and Benedicts and St. Francis and all these different groups, which was their way of not imploding, but we can get into that later, right? That's their little denominational groups spiraling off. And but he kind of lumps all these different churches into these different ways of approaching spirituality. What I love about this way is when I read through this book, as I'm reading through a view of church that's foreign to me, I go, at first, I'm like, this is just kind of weird. Who would want to do this way? This seems, but by the end of it, I'm going like, I want to participate in this a bit. this is actually really kind of neat. This is a great way to do it. And then as I read some ideas that I was more accustomed to, I was like, oh yeah, of course that works, of course. And then he starts to give the drawbacks to it. And I go, oh yeah, those are some pitfalls. Every way that we kind of form something becomes good and beautiful, and then there's parts of it that aren't. There's parts of it that get sticky. We need to watch ourselves for. One of the traditions that he walks through is the idea of the contemplative tradition, or discovering the prayer-filled life, right? Maybe some of you grew up in traditions where you had a lot of prayers that you had to do, right? And if you did something wrong, you had to do X amount of prayers. And if you did this, you had to do some prayers. And everything was around, well, have you done your prayers? Have you done your prayers? Have you done your prayers? And your prayers were not like quick little simple prayers when you got. They were like, there was some depth. There were some things that were going on in there. Your services, if you'd go to church or you're in meetings, would be rather solemn and maybe quiet and still, right? If there was some singing or noise, it was done kind of quickly and come back into that place. And for many, the modern expression of faith, we've totally lost that. It's disappeared for us. But I look at it and I go, man, imagine how many of us should say, man, I wish I could slow down. Right? I wish I could slow down. And we live in a day and age where we live at like a breakneck pace. But it's interesting, have you ever seen any ads from like the 40s and stuff saying like, in 10 years from now, we're going to have like a 4-hour work week or day, or, the chores are going to be done by all these machines, and they're going to have electricity everywhere, and everything's just going to slow, it's just going to be so great, right? And it's like, I don't know where that went, but as we've been able to be more efficient, we just be more efficient. We add more and more in there. And the contemplative tradition allows for space for us to slow down, to breathe, say some prayers, maybe even a prayer that is not spontaneous. For us evangelical charismatics, that's like, prayer that someone else maybe wrote and has wisdom in it. Contemplative prayer, contemplative life. The next one that he puts together is this idea of the holiness traditions, discovering the virtuous life. Right? These are church traditions that when they started especially, there was something about living right with God. Saying, you know what, culture's going this way, things are going this way, we need to live right with God, and that is the thing that we're going for. There is as I read through that chapter years ago and going through, it's like, there's some things that in my life that I know I would be better off if they weren't there. Right? These forms of entertainment that we have, the way that maybe we handle ourselves in different ways, and it's like, you know what? If holy, God, I want to be so close to you that none of this other stuff seems valuable. Right? I want to be so close to you that I just, this satisfies me. And getting into the things of the snares, if you will, of this world, just don't appetize me. You want to bring me in this direction. One of the negative sides of that tradition, though, is it can become very legalistic. Right? Everybody's being watched, and there's like a magnifying glass on everyone's life, and there's no room for breath. The negative side of the contemplative life, we kind of miss by that, is that there can come a place where everything is so in our minds, so in our heads, and so in our individual expression that the larger church and the larger guidance of Scripture in the church can be lost. And next thing you know, we're getting off the path. The next tradition that he talks about in his book is the charismatic tradition, discovering the Spirit-empowered life. This is where our Pentecostal and charismatic friends would lie. And even as a vineyard church, we fall in this space. I believe that God can move powerfully, that he can speak to us, that he can heal, he can empower us supernaturally. Right? And all of these ideas that we go through are throughout the whole church, but these are kind of focusing on traditions that say this is what we are about. The negative side, the positive side of the charismatic tradition is there's a faith boost, if you will. If God is with me, who can be against me? right? No weapon formed against me will prosper, right? Some of you guys that have been in more charismatic spots, those are like you've heard those prayers a lot, right? There's something powerful about that, and there's something about facing the world knowing that God is with you, right? Because the early Pentecostal and charismatic movements were amongst the marginalized people, the people that were on the outside, right? And they started having these meetings, and God started showing up and doing these amazing things, and even the white folks said, I'm going to go check that out. We're going to leave that there. It's an amazing history of the Pentecostal church in America. And the negative side of it is eventually you can start to say, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? Well, it matters how much you shake, rattle, and roll, right? It matters how loud you pray, how loud you sing. That's what really matters. And you start to drift into this kind of show and hype and expressiveness that is maybe not what God is really doing. The other tradition that he lays out, and this book was written a little while ago, he might change his words, he might not, is the idea of the social justice tradition, discovering the passionate life. Today in our culture, that word has been hijacked by a number of different communities, and it does not negate the issue that as followers of Jesus, we should be concerned with what is going on in the world. We should see hurting, broken people and say, you know what, I want to bring relief to that. I think if God was here, he would want to step in and set something right in that situation. We talked a little bit last week about the Salvation Army, right? The early Salvation Army. No one was going to go in and be like, oh, these are a bunch of liberals, right? The early Salvation Army, right? That's not what was going on. These were people saying, like, you are going to give your life up for the cost of the poor. You're going to give yourself up. Mother Teresa, same type of space of living amongst the dying in Calcutta. Going out into the poorest of the poor, right? There was no social media snap and going, I'm going to get a bunch of likes for this, and that's going to change the world, right? There was no fluff. It was hard work to see the world transformed. The next tradition, the negative side of the social justice tradition, the positive side is you get out and you do the things that I think God has called us to do, and you see things helped in the world. There is something, when I see the numbers of how many people who profess that they're Christians in the world, and then I see some of the issues, and I go, man, imagine if all these people that said that actually moved in that direction a little. What kind of a world would we have? The negative side of it is it becomes, again, an end in itself, right? It becomes, Jesus kind of ends up getting pushed to the sides, and the scriptures pushed to the sides, and it becomes about, well, we gave X amount of dollars to the poor, so we're good. We helped X amount of people, so we're good. We don't need that other stuff. That kind of just gets in the way. And it's like, that's actually what gives you the power to do these things. The next tradition is the evangelical tradition. Another tradition that I think here we kind of find ourselves in. He lays it out as discovering the word-centered life. That the scriptures really, really matter. They keep us in check. They keep us moving in the right direction. If we want to say, oh, we're all about Jesus, well, how are you figuring out about who Jesus is? Well, through the scriptures. And then when there's places that are hard, well, let's look at what the church has thought over history about coming into those places. The negative side of the word tradition, or the evangelical tradition, is we can get into that place where we're right all the time. And the love meter goes down and down and down. And it's all about having the right teachings and the right doctrine. And we just serve meats served to idols, and we don't care. And we send that weak believer out back into the world to figure it out on their own because they didn't measure up. So, the last tradition that he goes through is the incarnational traditions, discovering the sacramental life. Right, we have our Episcopalian friends on the other side of town. If you were to go to their service, it would be very different than this. There'd probably be some singing, there'd be things, but there would be some candles lit, maybe some banners and different things, just kind of people walking through with different things. What is going? It would be very different for you, right? But for them, there's something beautiful about all these little things they're doing. Lighting this candle, taking a moment of quiet, and praying, and singing a song together, and then on and on and on. They have something that's beautiful in that. The great part about the incarnational life is that you start to see God moving in the beauty of God in everything, right? We do communion together. right? And the reason why is because that's a more incarnational practice, right? A lot of evangelical churches go like, we do that like once a quarter because somebody got complained that we didn't do it, right? They kind of get it. And I'm going like, we can learn from our incarnational friends that holding a piece of bread and some juice, there's a moment where something different happens that you can't get any other way. There's something tangible about it, something real about it. And there's something that is deeply spiritual and new that's in that space. The negative side to it is, again, it can become the ultimate focus. How much do I see God in everything? And what is God doing in this and that? And the scriptures become less and less put into that space. So as we go through that quickly, one of the I'm not calling different church. We did talk about the Episcopalians, but it's because they're fun to say, and I probably say it wrong. But as you're going through, God will take you in different directions in your life, right? You are in this room right now, but you may move for different reasons. You may find yourself going, I need to find a new church or something. That happens. And what I would love for you to do is to not just jump someplace or just go haphazardly, but go, what am I really looking for? What am I really seeing that I think would fill me? Right? And maybe you're not getting in a certain space, or you move, or you're talking to someone, and you're having a conversation with them, and they start talking about their church, and you go, oh, you guys are incarnational. You've got like bells and smells and robes and stuff, right? You're in, okay, I see where you're going. That's maybe not what I'm interested in. Right? And go on and on. You can find yourself in that space. And then the other part of it is some of us are in spaces where maybe we feel stuck, spiritually stuck. Right? That happens. It's normal. Right? I just want to say that first. Like, that's how it goes. Right? As we read through the text, you see people's lives. You take a guy like Moses, and he doesn't really have a God, even awareness, really, until he's like 80. All right? Some of you are like, I got some time to wait, right? And there's so many other people in the story. There's millions of other people that don't actually even have these types of experiences. So sometimes we have this idea that following God is going to be this amazing thing. It's all going to work out great. But sometimes we get stuck. And what we need to reboot ourselves is we kind of need to look at our tradition and our way we follow Jesus in just a slightly different way. Doesn't mean you go to another church and just every 2 or 3 years hop to another church. And that works for you. That might work. But as we read through those things, I'm just going to read them quickly again. Just kind of pause for a minute and go, you know what? I need a little more of that. The contemplative tradition, discovering the prayer-filled life. The holiness tradition, discovering the virtuous life. The charismatic tradition, discovering the spirit-empowered life. The social justice tradition, discovering the compassionate life. The evangelical tradition, discovering the word-centered life. The incarnational tradition, discovering the sacramental life. As you hear that list, and if there's something that kind of pops off on you, like, just be in prayer. Be like, oh God, how do I be more contemplative? How do I slow down? And as you're out and about in the world and you talk to someone and their faith is more contemplative, be like, share with me about that. You see a book, you see something that seems, be a little curious about what it would be to see your faith moved in that place. Now, if you start getting into things where people are like, yeah, Jesus is cool, but like we like these, all right, you can say, thank you, I'll discover something else a different way, right? But there's something about opening ourselves up to the church, the true church, that through history has seen these hidden gems of faith, and honoring them and loving what they're doing and moving with them and seeing what they might do for us. We're going to take communion together, which we just talked about is more incarnational than other spaces, and because I just really, as a church, I'd love to see us be many of these things coming together. Yes, we have the evangelical side and we have this charismatic mix in there, but it's like we can sit and be quiet every once in a while, and we can take communion every once in a while, and we can help folks in our community every once in a while. We can do all of these things together. But why don't we stand? So we're going to take communion together. The way we do communion here is we go to the center aisle, and we grab the elements and you come peel back to your seats. We do have extras on the side that are just kind of for dipping in the cup if we do run out. And this is an open communion. If you're a follower of Jesus, or if you want more of Jesus in your life, you know that coming to him is going to bring life and life abundant, and it's going to be a forgiveness for your sin and for your brokenness, and you know that life is found in Jesus. Come and take. So why don't we start it together? Why don't you start to come down the center aisle and receive the elements together.